So our next guest, we are so fortunate to be joined by, and I want to tell you a little bit about her. You can see her over here, Dr. Ericka Goodwin. And I want to tell you about Dr. Ericka Goodwin because I think she's going to bring a very unique perspective to our discussion. She is the CEO of Goodwin Wellness Enterprises, LLC, and Goodwin Medical Associates, LLC. Dr. Goodwin is a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, as well as being a best-selling author, speaker, and integrative lifestyle coach. She's a graduate of Spelman College and Emory University School of Medicine, where she completed her general psychiatry training at Morehouse School of Medicine. She became a Gene Spurlock Congressional Fellow before training in child and adolescent psychiatry at Harvard. She's passionate about improving mental wellness, making people feel loved, cared for, and seen. And she also wants to help people see the best in themselves. How could we ask for more than that? Dr. Goodwin,
well, thank you. You make me sound phenomenal. Everything. Like, you have a laundry list of accomplishments. I am so glad that you were able to take the time out of your day to be here today. Okay.
Hey, how could I not show up for When Docs Talk?
Well, thank you so much. We're happy to have you here today. All right, same question to you to start off with. What's different in 2020? What are you seeing?
If I had to say what's different in 2020, it's literally everything. It's all coming at the same time. And I think the thing with 2020 is I try to encourage people, don't make that statement, what else can happen?
Right.
Because we turn around and something else happens every time. There's something that feel like something happens every single week. There's
every week
someone dying. People are having all these losses. We're dealing with the racial injustice issues. We're dealing with COVID. You're dealing with how does this all plot out long term when you don't quite know when it's ending. And I think what's different is that people are emotionally raw right now because it's been so much. So I look at it as a concept that a lot of people's emotional reserve is not there. So people that would have before either had a full cup or at least been on 3/4, that
low now.
Which is why I think the racial injustice is hit different, because a lot of us know that, especially being Black in America, they've been killing Black people for centuries.
Right.
It's not new, but a lot of this hits different. Number one, because it's, as Gil Scott Heron said, the revolution will not be televised. Well, this time it actually is.
It is.
and the blatant disregard for human life that people are seeing is hitting a higher level because, number one, people, you're looking at it, and you're like, I know people see you. But just, you're on that dude's neck with your hands in your pocket chilling.
And he's still doing
it.
And I think what ended up happening is because people were already worn down from COVID, that when the racial injustice has continued to amp up, that people didn't have that resistance. So the thing I'm going to speak to is the fact that, especially for people that are Black, is that people don't have the energy to wear the mask anymore. So the way people could kind of hold it together and it's like, yeah, I had a bunch of microaggressions or it was racist today, but I can keep on pushing. I'm going to smile and I'm going to do my job. And hello, everyone, how can I help you?
A lot more difficult.
Is that now people are like, I don't know about y'all. You have days at work, you're like, I just feel like crying. And I don't have a mental health issue right now. It just feels like too much. And I think the difference now is it's hitting that way for people that are directly affected. And then people are starting to have awareness they didn't have before. So then you have people that desire to be allies that are like, well, we didn't realize when you were talking about this before, it was real.
Yeah.
So I think it's the cumulative effect, because you're not just dealing with one situation, that these are almost like having multiple trauma.
Like back to back almost.
And each one is tied with so many losses. People have their personal losses as far as people they know that are dying from COVID or otherwise, because adulting in life didn't stop just because COVID started.
Right.
And just because they're killing people, life didn't stop. And people are dealing with all of this at the same time. So I think what we're seeing is all these people that either previously didn't have mental health issues, where they'd be just a little anxious or something. It was workable. all now looking to seek treatment or messaging all of us like, hey, what do I do? Or my kid's all stressed out, or no one wants to do their virtual learning. And you're seeing this uptick of people that previously weren't dealing with these issues, all coming forward and actually seeming like they're ready to get help, because now it just feels unmanageable.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anwar Osborne. There's been some confusion lately about wearing masks, and I want to give you the facts. Masks are like your drawers. Follow drawers rules. Rule number 1, don't let anything hang out. Nothing should be peeking out of your drawers ever. None of this. None of this. You can't bird box the Rona. Rule number 2, don't adjust in public. Would you really dig deep to pick out a wedgie? No. Don't adjust them in public with your hands. Your hands carry germs. Wash those nasty things before you put your mask on and before you take it off. Rule number 3, keep them off the table. When you go to a restaurant, would you just casually toss your dirty drawers on the table? I don't need your Fruit of the Looms next to my guacamole. No bueno. Rule number 4, wash them or be nasty. If your mask has more stains on it than the Tupperware you use to store your tomato sauce, you got problems. If it has holes in it, trash it. Wash your mask. Rule number 5, don't swap them. Don't share them with your friends. Hey bro, can I borrow your boxes real quick to just run in that store over there? I mean, for real, remember the rules. Don't let anything hang out. Don't adjust anything in public. Keep them off the table. Wash them or be nasty. And don't swap them. Most importantly, wear them. Now you know. Don't forget it.
You said something that makes me want to transition to the next point. You talked about virtual learning, and that makes me think about my virtual learners, my children.
Bless you.
Which, yes, I need the blessing. But I know that you have studied child and adolescent psychiatry, and I'm really curious to know, and believe that a lot of our viewers want to know, what your perspective is on what kind of mental health challenges, I should say, our children are facing.
Well, it's a huge change, and naturally, as adults, we have a capacity to have abstract thinking that the average child is not going to have. You know, a lot of the capacity for abstract thinking starts in their teens. So this isn't stuff that, and it really develops more in young adulthood. So they don't fully, number one, understand what's going on, and then time moves differently for children. So you have little kids, and they're like, you put them in timeout for 1 minute, and it was forever.
Right.
So a lot of them, it's just the kids don't understand the grip of it. So I think it's a huge thing to be having the separation, because that's where a lot of their social contacts were. And then children that are in transitional ages, that when they left school in the spring, if they didn't go back physically this fall, then that was the end. They didn't see anybody. You know, they're not, and especially if you're living in neighborhoods or things where there aren't kids or you weren't necessarily connected, is that it's stressful because it's new, and some kids thrive on that social connection.
Of course.
Some children are not going to be as prone to being able to manage virtual learning, that depending on how kids take in information, whether or not that kind of works for them, like a kid that likes to have a little bit more movement is not going to be happy sitting in front of a TV screen. And you're going to see a lot of kids, and we're already seeing it, where they're having tantrums or they're upset. They're like, I don't want to do this. Right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then the challenge of the fact that a lot of adults are working from home at the same time. So they're looking for how can they support their child, because especially if you don't have teenagers and you have, or like tweens, if you have little young kids, it's not like you could sit them in front of the computer and say, Zoom away.
Right.
I'll check on you when I take my lunch break.
Right.
You know, send me a text if you can't figure something out. That it's almost like I put it like when you have kids in timeout, when they're in timeout or they're in punishment, so are you. It's that you find with a lot of families that when these kids are virtual schooling, everyone's held hostage with that computer, with that
everyone
during the whole thing. And the struggle is real. Those memes of all those parents on the side sitting there like, because they're stuck sitting there the whole time because these kids can't stay on task, and different people are going to have the ingenuity to be really creative and be able to engage kids, but it's not the skill set they originally had to have to teach.
So how do we help the children with some of the things that you're talking about, in these days? That's what makes 2020 particularly challenging is, one, we recognize some of the challenges. So first of all, getting to what's challenging us and really conceptualizing what is really the problem, that's the first issue. And then when we figure out what the problem is, what do? We have these constraints that I think we've never had in 2020. So how do we support children and adolescents, family members, or whomever who are in that subset of children and adolescents who are struggling because of any mental health issues that 2020 is bringing?
I'd say the first thing is number one, keeping in mind that these are unusual times. The solutions you need day to day may change. So being able to give yourself grace and give your children grace, because the solution that worked yesterday may not be the solution that works the next day. So the first thing is kind of holding on to what you are in control, given that a lot of the crux of what's going on is the uncertainty itself. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, when it comes to managing virtual school is making sure you're on top of what the expectations are. You're in touch with your kids' school, their counselors, their principals, so that you know exactly what's going on, that you're also aware of how much they can kind of sit for a second and when they need breaks, so that if the school's not doing it, you can do it.
Absolutely.
Also find things to do together with them so that their life isn't just school and being idle. So and finding ways to, not the same as rewarding kids for good grades, but doing special things or spending time with them so that there's kind of a payoff at the end of the day, and letting them be in control of something. So maybe they can pick a theme for dinner or a meal, or you could still do thematic clothing days, pajama days. They'll be fine. It's on Zoom.
Yeah.
and for a family, it helps give the child back control. And also listen to the child. If the child seems out of sorts or your kid is acting different, because no one's going to be an expert on your child like you are.
Like you are.
Is if you notice your kid's not sleeping, or just the side of the computer makes them cry, or they don't want to sit down. A lot of them will just say they don't want to do it. And they're not, I think I said not sleeping, if they're not eating, or they're just out, or you notice they just are crying a lot more.
Some of the things that we would look for in adults, not sleeping, not eating, crying more, the tantrums that you mentioned. I want to put this back up, actually. One of our viewers wants to know, what about kids that are coming from troubled homes and have, and they don't really have, or I don't know if they meant they would like to get mental health support at school. What would be your recommendations there? Because there are a lot of people, not just kids, people who are in abusive situations or what have you are having trouble. But since we're focusing on children, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the complicated things right now, and I think one of the hugest challenges that the school system and social services is facing, is the fact that school was one of the main places where you identified when a child was neglected or abused. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By switching to virtual and the kids not being there, people don't have the same contact with the children to be able to potentially report things or enter into child services for additional support. The one thing that is happening, though, as far as with the schools, even though they're switching to virtual, is most of them still have a significant companion set of services, so that they still do have counselors and other supports. And the ones that contracted out, still, most people have switched over to virtual, as Dr. Metzger had talked about earlier. So one of the things is, when these kids start having difficulty, is going ahead and reaching out. Now, the other thing we do mention is they're working on putting systems in place of how people can report there's a problem if they can't easily do it at school.
Okay.
We're talking about issues also not only with children that are abused, but also battered wives.
Yes.
So I know they were working on some ways for people to possibly signal people, like at pharmacies and places like that, as an alternative, since the school just doesn't have the same capacity as it did before. Now, as far as if kids are just dealing with some trouble or some difficulty, they can still reach out to their counselor. And a lot of schools do have a creative way that they're doing wraparound services, and the services they can provide, they may be able to assist with referrals to other providers that are outside of the school,
right,
to problem solve.
Okay. Davida, do you have any other questions? Because I wanted to put up one thing before we thank our guest. What question do you want to ask?
Well, I really didn't have a question, but unlike Dr. Ipe, I don't have any children, but I do have nieces and nephews, and a lot of stuff that you touched on, I definitely want to either sit down with my brother and his children and like express my concern in those ways, especially since even though right now we may not recognize these issues, but to just be abreast on what could possibly happen. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And the one thing I would always say is, if you have a question, ask, because a lot of times kids will tell you. If they won't tell you directly, you play with them, you color, and you ask why they're distracted.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people will just assume a child is okay. So, the thing I encourage is to ask and actually talk to them.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, speaking about ask, I wanted to let you all know where you can find Dr. Ericka Goodwin. You can actually seek her services and find out more about her at askdrgoodwin.com. I want you to also know that she has written a book called Fix Your Fairy Tale, A Woman's Guide to a Great Life, Love, and Legacy. And you can check out that book at fixyourfairytalebook.com. This is a very busy lady with a lot of great insights, and we're fortunate to have her. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodwin.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, everyone, that completes another episode of When Docs Talks, Are We OK series, examining the challenges to mental health in 2020. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that you recognize that you're not alone. Please be sure to check us out at our YouTube channel, When Docs Talk. Subscribe to us and get notifications for our upcoming shows. And if you've missed any of our series or any of our past episodes, you could also catch them there.